Hey there, audit and fraud, friends and family. Listen, you've heard that old saying that there are two sides to every story, right? But here's what I've always found interesting about that. Have you ever had two people tell you their side of the exact same situation? And then after hearing both of their sides, you thought to yourself, I kind of believe you both. Because two things can be true at the same time, right? And sometimes the question isn't necessarily which person is lying. Sometimes the question is, what in the heck actually happened here? So, if you've ever had that feeling before, you're going to stick around for this one. I know I say this every week. This one is real crazy. Like, real crazy. Ready? Let's go. Well, I'm trying to go here, but I don't think.
Welcome to the Friday Fraudster podcast. Join them as they discuss sad, funny, and sometimes disturbing fraud stories. Be sure to catch past episodes on your favorite podcasting platform or go to www.fridayfraudster.com.
All right, you guys. So it's going to be one of those days where we have some small technical issues, right? Yeah. So I'm just going to bring him up. Thomas is saying, hey, either my internet is dying or yours is. I think it's probably both.
It works great all week until we go live.
Isn't that the truth? And Carol is here, and Carol says, happy Friday, everyone. Oh man, my internet looks terrible today. This is insane. I'm looking at it live on another screen, and man, I'm having some issues this week. But, you all heard the question that I asked, right? Have you ever had one of those situations where somebody told you one part of a story, somebody else told you another part of a story, and once you really dug into it, you kind of believed them both? You ever had that situation before, Thomas?
I have kids. Now, I will give them credit though. It has been extremely rare, but especially when they were very, very little. Oh yes, it was kind of a he said, she said. You're like, you know what? I think there's a little truth going on both sides here.
Yeah, that's crazy. Oh man, I wonder what's going on with my connection because it is horrible. I'm looking at the screen and I look all fuzzy and stuff, but that's okay. But that is okay. Okay, so listen, today, before we get into this one, I need to make something really clear. Because usually when we do Friday Froster, somebody has been charged or there's a criminal complaint or something like that. This one, nobody's pleaded guilty to anything, nobody has been sentenced. And this is actually a civil case. There are allegations and then there are counter allegations, and both sides have different versions of what really happened. So we're not going to tell you who's guilty because we don't know, but we are going to look at what each side is saying and where it takes us. And then I'm curious to see what happens if you change your mind throughout the episode. So that so if your mind
And you might
changes
change your mind just because of partial sentences heard whenever Rob and I are talking.
there you go. You know what I'm going to do? I am going to turn my camera off because that might help.
Oh
I know I look
Lord,
better like this.
I'm saying nobody wants to see just my ugly face up here. You're
So to
torturing
turn my
people.
camera off, well, here's the deal. People people will forgive bad video, but they won't forgive bad audio, you know?
This is true.
So
This is very true.
so I'll turn my camera off and here's what I'll say. First, I want to introduce Patricia. Let's start with Patricia. Patricia Velez. She was an executive assistant, and not just any executive assistant. She was the executive assistant to the CEO of the bank. I'm not going to tell you what bank it is yet. But Thomas, I want to ask you, in any organization, how much does the executive assistant know about what's going on?
And all the organizations I've been part of, they normally know more than the CEO and the CFO.
Isn't that the truth? Because think about it. They know the calendars, the travel, the meetings, the expenses, who comes into the office, who calls the office, who meets with the CEO.
Well,
So a
and
lot.
they're often the gatekeeper, right? They're the ones that say, no, you can't talk to the CEO right now, or the CEO is going to be over here, so give me a message and I'll pass the message along. They know that office gossip as far as who's getting along with who and what department hates the other department, and I mean they have their finger on the pulse of the entire organization most of the time.
Absolutely. There you go. They have their finger on the pulse of the entire organization. And if you think about it, if something questionable were happening around the CEO, the executive assistant is most likely to see it. So let's talk about today. Today, the bank is Amalgamated Bank. You're not small either. $9.4 billion in assets. Now, the CEO is Priscilla Sims Brown. That's the CEO of our good old Amalgamation Bank. And what has happened here is something, well, extremely interesting. Patricia has filed a lawsuit. And in her lawsuit, she said that she saw something about the CEO that concerned her. So let's start with one person. According to the lawsuit, the CEO had someone in her life who was described as her handyman, but also her tenant. So her handyman who happened to be a tenant on a property that she owned, and the person was also described as a friend. So you have a tenant, a handyman, and a friend. And I'm thinking, okay, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Everybody has a tenant or if they have a rental property. Everybody has a handyman and everybody has friends. But according to Patricia's allegations, the bank hired the CEO's friend and handyman, hired him as the CEO's personal driver. So what do you think about that, Thomas? Any problems with that?
This reminds me of Taylor Farms 2 weeks ago. Hiring. Now I say that I'm okay with it if the CEO had permission from the board and there was nothing shady going on. If everything was above board, on the table, very clear. Hey, I personal driver. I already know this person, but I want to do this. I'm fine with it as long as it was properly approved.
Ah, there you go. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I would love to have a
Now,
personal driver that my company paid for.
well, but here's where it gets even more interesting though, because as the CEO's personal driver, the allegation is that They classified him as a human resources professional. Now, what do you think?
Say that one more time. You broke up just a little bit on me.
They classified him as a human resources professional in the organization.
Yeah, that sounds like it's getting covered up a little bit. I would have a problem with that.
Yeah, that's my thought too. Ah, I see. That's my thought too. You can't hire them as a human resources professional. Now, here we go. The CEO having a driver isn't necessarily unusual. Bank hiring someone the CEO knows isn't necessarily wrong either. But as you said, Thomas, did the board approve it? And then why did they classify them as an HR professional? That doesn't make sense. Now, then there's the car. There's the car. Should the CEO have a car? Maybe. Should the company pay for it? I don't know, possibly. But according to the executive assistant's lawsuit, the bank spent somewhere around $100,000 on a vehicle allegedly used exclusively by the CEO and the driver. So now what do you think?
I mean, it's a bank. The CEO. It wouldn't shock me, and it wouldn't shock me if the CEO of a bank legitimately was driving $100,000 car. There's a large company here in the Houston area that is heavily involved in the restaurant industry. The owner of the company also is a partial owner of the Houston Rockets, is heavily involved in numerous different business dealings. But he also owns the Bentley dealership next door to their main corporate office because, in part, because he likes to drive Bentleys, and why own one when you can just own a dealership? So something like that doesn't necessarily surprise me. But again, only if everything's being transparent, properly reported, properly approved. Is there any kind of tax implementation, implications on this also? Because obviously he's getting a personal benefit out of this. He
Absolutely.
or she.
Well, and I think too in the case that you mentioned, this particular gentleman, because I know who you're talking about, he's the owner too, though. You
Yep.
know, so I think that's a little bit different. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, absolutely,
Okay,
it is. Yep.
okay. So let's dig a little deeper though, because the executive assistant decided to blow the whistle. She was like, "Wait a minute, this doesn't look right." So she decides that she's so uncomfortable that, according to her lawsuit, in December of 2024, she files a whistleblower complaint with the bank's board. That's a good thing, right?
That is a good. It is good that they had that set up and the abilities there. Yeah, to do so.
Yeah, so she saw something, so she said something. And as per usual, what happens with people who blow the whistle, about 4 months later, she was fired.
Unfortunately, I hate hearing it, but I mean we both know that that's common as much as it sucks.
Well, but here's the thing. She alleges that she was fired, and she thinks that it's possibly retaliation. You think it's probably retaliation? Well, better yet, hold on. For those of you listening, if someone were to blow the whistle on an organization and then 4 months later they were fired, do you think it's possibly retaliation or that it's probably unrelated? What do you think? Just let me know. Do you think it's retaliation? You can type retaliation into the chat, or do you think it's possibly unrelated? It just so happens that she was fired a few months after blowing the whistle, just totally unrelated. What do you all think? So, okay. So she was fired a few months later. What do you think, Thomas? Retaliation?
That's what I would assume, but you hope not. But reporting something like that, especially when you're an executive assistant and you're reporting the executive you're the assistant for. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would be shocked if it's not.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so oh wow. So now the organization is claiming. Wait, before I get there, let's see. Okay, the organization is claiming that in late 2024, they discovered something wrong on the executive assistant's corporate cards. Here's what they're saying. They're saying that they identified 50 purchases totaling about $5,500 where she did not provide receipts. And that is possibly what led to her firing.
That sounds legitimate, but it would be a little surprising that someone would blow the whistle on something and yet be covering up something themselves.
Yeah. That's what I thought too. So okay. So check this out. Here's what she was spending some of the stuff on. Here's what she was spending some of the stuff on. Hold on 1 second. Let me tell you that so she was spending on hotels, flights, restaurants, Ubers, and that could all be legit until you see gymnastics classes and solar panels for a home.
Yeah, that's a little questionable.
Just a tad bit, right? But okay, okay. So it gets better. It gets better though. Patricia has an answer. She has an answer because there's another piece of it. In February of 2025, she acknowledged that some personal expenses ended up on the corporate card and she reimbursed $1,100. That's the amount that she said was personal on the card on accident. And now I can tell you, and I think I told this story before on the podcast. I remember one time I made a mistake and charged a large fry from McDonald's on a corporate card because it looked just like my personal card.
Yeah, it look it. You look for trends, right? If it was a one-time expense and it happened, and either they self-reported or as soon as someone brought it up, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that," and it gets taken care of. I, yeah, mistakes happen. It could have been an honest, legitimate mistake. Yeah, like you said, a lot of times the cards look the same, or any number of reasons. So yeah, I one mistake like that, expect well, as long as it's not you're not talking about a $50,000 purchase or something, but something on the smaller side. I'm not gonna get that upset about it. Oops, I made a mistake. Here's the reimbursement. It won't happen again, and you keep moving forward.
Yeah, right. So that's kind of what I was thinking. So let's run down the timeline. Late 2024, the bank is saying that expense concerns came about with the executive assistant. December of 2024, she files a whistleblower complaint. So these things are happening almost at about the same time. February 2025, she acknowledged that some of them were personal charges. And then in April of 2025, she was terminated. And then in May of 2025, she filed her lawsuit. So the
You
question
said May the lawsuit was filed. When was she terminated?
in April.
April. So just a month later. So it was a pretty quick turnaround there. So she felt immediately like she was wrongfully terminated then.
Yeah. And so that begs the question, she could have already had this in the works anyway, because she could see the writing on the wall. She blew the whistle, allegedly, right? Well, no, she did blow the whistle. She blew the whistle on what she thinks is a fraud, and she could
Yeah.
see that they were trying to gang up against her. And so she got her ducks in a row.
Yeah, anybody that reports something on a whistleblower hotline, especially if it's your direct boss, I think it's very smart to either to have legal counsel in your pocket. And I'm not talking about the company's legal counsel. I mean a personal legal counsel in your pocket. So that way, if something does happen, you're already have discussions going on. You already have dialogue. They're already aware, and they can help with any kind of documentation that might be needed for a potential lawsuit if it comes to that. I would much rather spend a little bit of money on a potential on a lawyer and then not need them than need them, and now all of a sudden you have to play catch up and you hope you have all the documentation you need.
Okay, but there's one more wrinkle here. There's another one. One more allegation. They said that
But
Patricia
wait,
was,
there's more.
yeah, I know, right? They also said that Patricia was working as a real estate agent, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But they alleged that she was conducting some of her real estate business during normal banking hours.
Well, again, if it's approved, if it's okay to do so, and when I say approved, I don't mean necessarily her, but if it's an organizational policy of it's okay to to have some flexibility, then there's nothing wrong with it. But if it's not approved, if they think she's just going on a lunch break and she's working for 3 hours or something like that, then we have a problem.
Yeah, yeah. So uh, who do you believe in this instance, right? What was the executive assistant? For those of you just joining, let's catch us up a little bit. The story is about a bank where an executive assistant to the CEO said that some funny things were happening. She's saying that the CEO hired someone who was her personal handyman as well as a tenant in one of her properties and hired him as a driver for her and her only, and labeled the person as a human resources employee. Now, shortly after making these allegations, the executive assistant was fired, and the bank says that they fired her because they found some personal expenses on her credit card, and she was working as a real estate agent and was doing it on the job, not just during personal hours. So these are the allegations that are flying back and forth. And the question becomes, man, Thomas, who do you believe?
Who says you can't believe both? I mean,
Ah,
they're not necessarily independent, right? They could have she she could have been working as an independent realtor like this. Her boss could have known about it and said, "It's fine. Let's just don't tell anybody." And then now she's getting fired because they were looking for a reason, or he or she could have not known that that's what she was doing, and then found out and decided to terminate her. So there's different things there. So retaliation for the hotline could have happened, or it could have been completely separate. There's a lot of variables there, but that's also why I like to give HR people a hard time, and I know several HR vice presidents and such, and we like to joke and kid about it a bit, but that's why when you go to HR, they say, yeah, you can have this policy, but it needs to be a blanket policy applying to everyone across the company, and you need to enforce it equally across the company. So if they knew that she was having this secondary job, you can't fire someone else for having a secondary job, right? So you've got to make sure. But if they knew about it and they hadn't done anything about it in the past, then that's just an excuse, and that's hiding behind retaliatory firing.
no, that's a very good point. And I think the bigger lesson here, too, for a lot of us is two things can be true simultaneously. And I think another big lesson, too, is you really have to watch the things that people say and the timing, because oftentimes when you find something in an organization and you disclose it, the smear campaign comes out to try and silence the person that is telling it. However, the person who's telling may also have some skeletons in their closet. Let me tell you guys, This is a story that's related, and it's very interesting. So I worked at this one organization where I was in charge of investigations. We get this allegation that something bad is happening. Someone is actually stealing. So to keep a long story short, we did the investigation, and it turns out the person actually was stealing. Now, the person who blew the whistle, they didn't like her because the person that she told on was one of the favorite people in the organization. He was friends with executive management and they didn't like it. And so they launched an attack on the whistleblower. And what they found out was that the whistleblower had actually been terminated from her prior role for theft. Now, here's where it got interesting. They pulled the whistleblower's HR file because what they wanted to do was say that you did not disclose that you were fired from theft from your previous job. You know what was interesting though is the whistleblower disclosed on her application that she had been terminated from her previous job for theft. So, so two things can be true. The whistleblower stole from her previous job. That did not necessarily mean that she was stealing from the current job, and that also didn't mean that her allegations were false and unfounded. Two things can be true, and you have to watch people who use the deflection technique to take you away from the truth.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it's we see that in politics, right, all the time as well. You're upset about one thing, so they start going off about something completely different, just to kind of distract you. So yeah, two things can be the same, the truth at the same time, but not necessarily, be related to each other. And we have to be very careful of that.
Yeah, I call that the 3D technique. People defend, deflect, and deny. And
Yep.
I think as humans, we do one instinctively, even because nobody likes to be embarrassed and nobody likes to feel stupid. So I can take it if I talk to somebody and they begin defending their position, as long as it doesn't happen for too long, because your immediate reaction is going to be to defend, even if you are wrong. Most of us, But then when you do all three, and those are my markers. If you do one of the three, I'm like, okay, it's a normal human response. You do two of the three, my antenna is up, and I'm like, yeah, it's still, maybe they're trying to come to terms with what's happening. You do all three, you're probably being deceptive.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I remember one time I had a client, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was in Russia that I went to, and it was one of the former Soviet countries. I know that because the office was, well, if you've ever been to a former Soviet company or country, you know how the office was. You can imagine the color of the walls on the outside as well as the walls on the inside, the color, the paint schemes, everything. But anyway, you walk up the stairs and there was a door. And to the left was operations, and to the right was the finance and accounting department for this division. And the head of operations and the head of accounting hated each other. So they literally had direct reports that would do the communications for things because they couldn't stand to be in the same room as each other. Even though they were on the same floor of a very tiny building, they could not stand each other. And that made things very difficult from an internal audit perspective of doing just about anything. But you also had to question information that came in, files that came in, emails, anything like that. You had to really question every piece of data that came in to say, was this being manipulated in any way to make the other side look bad? Because both of them wanted each other fired. So yeah, that was something we had to end. So anytime an audit finding would come up, we had to really consider some of the underlying root cause, behind it. And then I found out at the very end, we were done with the audit. We had the report drafted. We meet with the head of finance there, and he started arguing against everything. I don't agree with this. I don't agree with that. We said, well, but you agreed to the facts. He goes, oh, yes, the facts are correct. So then what's the problem? Oh, I just have to defend my people. So that had another layer, in there as well, right? So yeah, anytime we have any kind of audits, we have to be aware that each piece of fact, of truth, stands on its own, and other things can also be true that don't necessarily correlate. And it can be difficult at times.
Yeah, well, here's where this one gets even more interesting because remember those that $5,500 in disputed credit card expenses? You would think that the bank would be asking her for 5,500 or the 5,500 minus the 1,100 that she already paid. What they are asking for is 150,000 plus dollars, and so now I'm real confused as to where that number comes from. But since this is a civil suit and an allegation that hasn't gone through discovery yet, we have no idea why they're asking for over $150,000 from the executive assistant to the CEO.
And is that request coming from legal counsel, or is that request being dictated by the CEO?
Oh, that's a fair point because we know it's coming from the company, but who's kind of driving that and why? Because this is where it gets real interesting because if you think about it, even though the executive assistant is the one who I think filed first, I believe, because I think this is just a counterclaim for 450,000 from the company. But oftentimes, what large corporations or sometimes people with money and or power will do is they will have lawsuits against you knowing that you don't have enough money to go the length with the lawsuit, and sometimes the process is the punishment. So the process of going through the lawsuit is the actual punishment even when you are innocent.
Right. Exactly right. So yeah, it could be a legitimate termination, but a retaliatory lawsuit. Very, very easily.
Yeah, yeah. And so in this one, it's not really a matter of who's telling the truth, right? Because we don't know. It could be either side. But the biggest thing is you got to follow the evidence.
Got to follow the evidence, but also the other executives in the banking in that bank need to make sure they are keeping an independent point of view. It's easy when you work with someone for a long period of time to have just you automatically assume either guilt or innocence, and so you won't change your mind on that. So I think they need to be very mindful of it. The board also needs to not only be mindful of it, but the board needs to be involved. The board definitely needs to be heavily involved in this and not just sit in a boardroom and rely on reports that are given to them, because you don't know who's influencing those reports either.
Yeah, so this one is going to get juicy. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this one today is because it's just an allegation. We know nothing. We can and will follow up on this one as it progresses because more information is bound to come out. And I really think this one has legs to be an investigation and the case that we've started with from the beginning, the absolute very beginning, because you got to think if $150,000 is really missing at some point, this would probably move from a civil case to possibly criminal, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I guess it depends on how much you're actually talking about. Because if it's under a certain amount, it basically just stays on the civil side, if I remember right. Depending on what the crimes, the allegations are, then it might not ever actually hit a criminal court. So you're right. It'll be interesting to follow this one, assuming it stays on the public side and isn't just settled privately.
Yeah, that's the part where I'm like, because this one is pretty good. So that's all I got for this one. Who's telling the truth? We don't know. And the thing is, both parties could be telling the truth, or neither party.
Yep. Either side could be telling the truth or partial truths. I could almost see this end up being settled in a way where the bank doesn't, because the bank has to worry about their own reputation. So I could almost see it where if the CEO is guilty of anything, then the bank could almost pay them off to go away. And then same with the whistleblower, they could almost just settle out of court and basically pay the whistleblower to shut up and go away. And then they just move on like nothing ever happened and you never hear about it again. I'm willing to bet that's what's going to end up happening.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
But
Well,
if
all right.
either one of them is actually guilty of some kind of fraud, then I hope something is filed, because otherwise nothing is ever caught on background checks, and these people will be hired for the exact same type of positions and the exact same type of authority again, and they could easily do it again if they are actually truly guilty. Then I wouldn't want to hire one of these people from one of my own companies. I mean, but the only way that would come up is if you do a background check.
Yeah, yeah, very true. Well, that's all I got for this week.
That was a fun
So,
one.
yeah. So, thank you all for joining us. What's well, never mind. I'll figure out the internet issues later. So, thank you all for joining us this week on the Friday Fraudster. We'll see you next week.
Have a great weekend.